Hi, this is Jake Oakland. I'm doing a presentation on ska music for Music 100 at College of Western Idaho. I'm going to be covering these areas, where ska began and the waves. I'll explain that later. The instruments that are used in ska. I'm going to do a very beginner basic technique of how to play ska guitar. I will go over the notable bands and I'll have some samples. And then finally, I'll go over why ska is important and how it's affected music and its lasting effects. So, ska started in Jamaica, and that was the first wave. The first wave basically means it was the very start. And it began in the early 60s, and Jamaicans heard, because of World War One, there were many American troops stationed in Jamaica, and their music was broadcasted from southern Louisiana and Florida. So the Jamaicans had access to American music, and they basically took it and combined it with rhythm and blues, or combined it with reggae and calypso and minto and that sort of music. And it was essentially the beginning of ska, and it was fairly popular for them. So the first wave didn't really lead to anything major for ska music. Ska pretty much stayed in Jamaica, and it was heard by other countries, but it wasn't really embraced until England picked it up in the late 70s, and this was the beginning of the second wave. And I should differentiate, like, the waves they're essentially gaps in popularity. So the first wave was the beginning, and then it kind of died off, and then the second wave began, and it just became more popular. But the second wave started in the late 70s, and it's also called the two-tone movement because people wore basically two tones in clothing, and it was like a checkered type black and white pattern, or kind of suits sort of made out of that color style. It was interesting. But punk rock had also began with like the Clash and the Sex Pistols at this time, and so this new style of ska was essentially a mixture of the first wave ska that came out of Jamaica and this new sort of crazy sounding rock music that formed in England. So it was pretty much just a fusion of the two, and it was more well received than ska music from Jamaica. Not to say that ska music from Jamaica was bad at all; it was great, but it was sort of, it wasn't quite mainstream, but it was just more well known and just easier to accept. But it focused a lot on racial unity. A lot of the bands from the second wave had both black members and white members all playing together, and it sent a good message. But eventually the second wave of ska music lost its popularity, and it was down for a few years until it started to pick up and bands started to play ska music in America. And it didn't only happen in America. It was big in Japan and Europe. It was still popular. The band still played it in England and in Jamaica. It's just that the overall popularity wasn't there anymore. But it was played in Canada, South America, pretty much everywhere. So it did make its mark on the music industry of the world. It just never found any commercial success until the third wave. But it started in the early 80s and really exploded in the 90s. A lot of bands came out of America. But they were very, very, very heavily influenced on the punk rock aspect of ska. They still had the whole reggae and Jamaican ska feel to it, but it was faster. There was more distortion with the guitars. It was just overall heavier. But the very first mainstream band that signed with a mainstream record company were the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. So they had the first they were the pioneers, I guess you could say. And they were followed very closely by Rancid and Real Big Fish. Real Big Fish is actually really popular now. They've had quite a few singles that have made it to on television and the things like that. And now we have the instruments, which are probably, well, they're the most important part of ska music because they make the music what it is. It's really unique, the instruments that they play, because when I think of a ska band, I think of a very, very punk influenced band, and punk bands always have guitars and drums and bass and the normal rock band sort of instruments. But a ska band actually uses, usually, well, a lot of the time they have a complete horn section with a trumpet, saxophone, trombone, or multiple trumpets. Trumpets are way more popular than like saxophones. A trumpet and trombone combination is pretty common. They still have regular guitars and bass and drums and that sort of thing. And then the guitars play. They play it in a special way. It's very noticeable, and I have an example coming up here. They also use a keyboardist or a pianist. These aren't as popular as they were in like the first wave, but a keyboardist is still has his place in the band, and it still sounds really good when they do have a keyboardist. It's just there's a lot of different varieties that there can be. So I'm going to show you guys a very beginner demonstration. I don't play guitar regularly, so I mess up quite a bit here, but this is my attempt to actually show you how it's played, the guitar ska style. So, ska guitar is played with a lot of barred chords, which is just, there's no open strings pretty much. They're either played or fretted. And a fretted string is just the string that's fretted somewhere. So, like that pretty much. But, the downstroke is, there's different ways to play ska guitar, but essentially the downstroke is muted, and then the upstroke is played, and I don't have the right setup for this, because I have too much distortion and it doesn't sound quite right, but it should sound something like this. Yeah, pretty much like that. So I'm just going to real quick go over some bands of the first, second, and third waves and show some small clips. But the bands of the first wave, now remember the first wave were in the 60s, and that's where Bob Marley came out of. And everyone knows who Bob Marley is, pretty much. But some other bands were the Skatalites, Prince Buster, Derek Morgan, and the Gladiators. They all had a very similar ska sound, which made them all basically in the same genre. But it's, a lot of people don't know that Bob Marley helped create ska music. He's more known for reggae, but reggae and ska are very similar. So I'm going to show you guys some music from the Skatalites.
In the winter of 1964 came this movie to Jamaica. The Skatalites took the music from the movie, put it to the ska, and came up with this sound. It's called Bye! 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 The Guns of Navarone.
So that was a small sample from the Scatolites. Very good band. Now we have the second wave, which remembers from England for the most part. Notable bands were The Madness, The Beat, Bad Manners, and The Specials. I'm going to show you guys a small sample from The Specials called Gangsters. So we're finally on to the third wave bands. There's a lot. I just tried to list some that are my favorites. Less Than Jake have been around for a long time. Operation Ivy started in the late 80s, but they only lasted 2 years. But most of the guys from Operation Ivy went on to form Rancid, which is a fairly popular band. They've got some ska influence, but they're pretty much punk rock. Streetlight Manifesto, very good band. Mustard Plug, Jai the Cat, and the Aquabats. A lot of you may have heard of the Aquabats. I think they had a TV show or something like that. But Streetlight Manifesto is a band that I'm going to play a sample song from. It's called Keys Be Nights.
In the backyard, shaving the old glass, feeling so strong. Something went wrong. Straight into my finger, what a stinger it was so long. I still remember that day, like the day that I said that I swear I never hurt myself again. But it seems that I'm deemed to be wrong, to be wrong, to be wrong. Gotta keep holding on. The honest place, no sorrow.
So from listening to music from the first, second, and third wave, you can see that it progressively gets faster and there's more rock influence. But anyway, there's a few reasons why ska has been important. It's a great example of how different genres and different styles of music and different ways of playing instruments can come together and form something that's incredibly unique. There's nothing that really sounds quite like ska music. Reggae does sound a lot like ska music, but that's what ska formed its basis on, was reggae. Ska music also has a very strong community because it's never really been that popular. It's had some like small mainstream success, but I've talked to people who they've never heard of ska music in their lives. But the people who do like it, it's a common bond between people. It's pretty neat. And all music has an effect on other styles of music. Different artists will borrow elements from different kinds of music, and ska music is something that it has its hand in a lot of different things, and it's been incorporated into many different genres. But it can be said that all music has this effect. But that pretty much wraps up my presentation on ska music. So thank you for listening, and this has been a presentation for Music 100. Thank you.